Hello everyone, I welcome you all to EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Neha and I am affiliated with Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Today we are going to study module which is titled Approaches to Gender and Development Part 3, Gender and Development GAD. So gender and development, which is also called GAD, is the most recently developed critical perspective to study women, gender and development. It basically represents a confluence of different and earlier feminist perspectives to study gender and development. Even though it still requires constant adaptations and contextual changes, until now this approach is the best suited to understand and practice development today. So in this particular module we discuss GAD in detail, and during the course of the module we aim to engage the students in understanding the shift in approach from women-centric efforts to gender-based approach to development, in developing a critical understanding of the basic features and contributions of GAD approach in the field of development, developing an understanding of how to engage with GAD approach while studying or implementing development programs from a gender lens. To begin with an overview of GAD approach, it is best to say that it originated as a better alternative to the earlier approaches, which were WID and WAD, to women's issues in development. It has its roots in socialist feminism, and it departs from modernization theory and finds the important links between relations of production and relations of reproduction. Now this part is what sets GAD very different apart from the earlier approaches. Thus, having incorporated lessons from WID and WAD approaches limitations, the socialist feminist analytical framework of GAD emphasizes gender relations in both productive as well as reproductive spheres of women's lives, and tries to cover all aspects of women's lives and to have a more comprehensive analysis of women's lives and their statuses. The central category of analysis in GAD is thus gender relations, and thus this approach considers men as equally important and desired contributors in development and finding solutions for women. Primarily, this framework uses gender-aware approach and empowerment approach in its implementation. If we talk about the origin of GAD, it emerged in the 1980s from the efforts of feminists and development theorists who argued that neither WID nor WAD addresses the fundamental structures that create and maintain gender inequalities. This approach is the most relevant to the countries of the South and also emerged from the writings and grassroots organizational experiences from the countries of the South and third world feminists. In the origin of GAD, UN Women's Decade also played a very significant role. During this decade, studies and activism highlighted that women's contributions have been ignored and their status remains much marginalized. By the end of the decade, such findings necessitated a shift to GAD approach. By 1990, WID, WAD and GAD perspectives largely converged, while different approaches to gender and development continue to evolve even today. Now we get down to the theoretical and conceptual underpinnings of GAD, and this is a very significant part if we try to understand the GAD approach. It is the theoretical and conceptual focus of GAD approach which makes it the most comprehensive of all approaches until now. So we'll begin with the conceptual focus, and the focus here in GAD approach is on the concept of gender. Gender concept is taken as a central category of analysis. The social relations of gender are the primary category which are analyzed within GAD approach. Gender relations are seen as socially constructed patterns of behavior and thus are believed to be something which can be altered and should be altered because these gender relations are not equal. GAD proponents are convinced that working with only women cannot provide complete solutions to women's problems, as gender relations are unequal, and they challenged the socially constructed and existing gender roles, responsibilities and relations. Two major conceptual frameworks are used in GAD according to Razavi and Miller. They are gender roles and social relations analysis together. They both determine expectations access to resources, access to power for women and men. All these gender roles and social relations are usually in favor of men and marginalize women. Women, because of the expected gender role, are expected to keep homes, do house-based work, while men are expected to exert power in their productive as well as household domains. GAD thus calls for an analysis of the manners in which these roles, responsibilities and expectations are assigned to women and men. It is at the level of the structures which create, the processes, structures, institutions, persons, groups that create and maintain these expectations, these roles, these responsibilities that GAD comes to work at. Within such a conceptual framework, GAD frames policies which attempt to transform traditional gender relations and gender roles. The gender analysis becomes the tool of GAD proponents who expose the unequal power relations embedded in traditional roles and gender division of labor. The work done by Caroline Moser finds special mention in working within GAD approach. Moser created a gender planning framework following GAD approach of emphasizing gender relations. Along with quantitative empirical facts, this particular framework of Moser examines the reasons and processes that influence access and control for women and men. It includes gender needs assessment, gender roles identification, disaggregation of control of resources and decision making within household, work household balance planning, and involving women in gender aware organizations and planning. So this is one of the examples of gender aware frameworks which are being produced, which are being created and which are being used within GAD approach. It is also important to briefly understand what exactly is meant by social relations of gender, what is meant by this phrase. Basically, social relations of gender are structured sets of social behaviors enacted between women and men, which are guided by norms and values and underpinned by ideology, sanctioned by a range of mechanisms from social opprobrium to death. The relationship between women and men is essentially a power relation in which, in the majority of societies known to us, women have less power than men. If we talk about the theoretical base, the theories that have informed GAD approach, socialist feminism is the feminist thought that has majorly influenced GAD proponents and GAD practices. Socialist feminists bring together the social construction of production as well as reproduction to explain women's subordination in the society. They question the validity of gender roles and focus attention on the social relations of gender. Socialist feminists recognize the need for increased participation for women in socio-political lives as much as economic lives. They stress more on finding out hows and whys of women's inferior roles, inferior status. They combine both the analysis of patriarchy as well as capitalism and see both as equal partners in creating structures and relations wherein women are marginalized and men are privileged. Socialist feminism basically synthesizes the claims and explanations of radical feminism and Marxist feminism, and therefore it focuses on both the public as well as the private spheres of women's lives. It says that liberation of women can only be achieved by ending both the economic capitalist structures and processes and also cultural patriarchal norms and practices, because they both are the sources of women's oppression. Now that we have understood what has been the conceptual focus in GAD and what are the theoretical base for the approach, we move on to see what are the major features and what are the major focus of GAD approach. There has been the major feature of GAD approach has been bringing a shift from focus on women to focus on gender relations and gender roles. GAD is not concerned with only women. but rather examines the social construction of gender and the production and maintenance of gender-specific roles and responsibilities. Unlike WIT and WAD, GAD does not translate into designing intervention programs for better integration of women. Rather, it questions and fundamentally examines and re-examines the existing social structures and institutions. As it draws from socialist feminist perspective, GAD approach recognizes that women's status in society is influenced by their position in national, local and regional economies and equally by the material conditions of their lives. Stressing on the patriarchal distribution of power, GAD perspective also holds that women's material conditions as well as lack of authority and power are caused and maintained by gender norms for women and men in a particular society. GAD approach encourages men's contribution towards a more gender equal society based in social justice. There is also a major shift in how development is seen, how development is viewed. GAD approach analyzes the role of development in shaping and reshaping of power relations. It understands that development also affects gender relations and are affected by gender relations. This theoretical approach is more holistic than its earlier counterparts like WID and WAD because it sees development as a complex process which is shaped by various socio-political and economic forces. Therefore, it focuses on social production as well as social reproduction in its analysis. Then gender mainstreaming is one of the major focus within GAD approach. Gender mainstreaming basically is a strategy which is adopted by gender analysts within GAD approach and is used to show commitment to change in power structures in national and international agencies. This gender mainstreaming approach begins with the assumption that there is gender inequality and that is the basis for development processes that are created or that are taken within GAD approach. Here we can see one of the projects which is made with gender mainstreaming approach. People can see if one tries to, there are men as well as women coming together to find out what can be the possible solutions, for example. Next, there is this complete rejection of public-private dichotomy within GAD, and this is a completely new thing which comes within GAD. It includes reproductive and productive lives of women in its analysis. It does not say only this, either this or that. It focuses on the nature of work done by women inside as well as outside homes by women. Therefore, GAD approach attacks the mechanism and views that undermine women's domestic as well as reproductive work as well. It enters the private spheres of women's lives and examines family as a site for women's oppression. Next, if we talk about features of GAD approach and what GAD sets out to do and how it sets out to do, one of the answers that we see is that it gives a very important role to state. It says that state has a role to play if women have to be liberated, if women have to be advanced. So it calls for state to take care of social services that might take load of women, and state is expected to do certain activities which will support women's social reproduction tasks, for example, care of children, etc. It also very significantly recognizes women's agency. It stresses on the fact that women are agents of their lives and they are not mere passive recipients of development assistance. They have the ability to and they can organize themselves and create political voice that is more powerful and that can call for their own empowerment. There is this recognition of differences among women within GAD approach. Patriarchy, it is understood within GAD approach that patriarchy works within and across classes and affects all women. There are differences of class, age, religion, ethnicity, etc. that have major influence of development outcomes for women. These intersections, interconnections and contradictions of gender, class, caste, race, etc. are duly recognized and addressed within GAD approach. The social construction of these categories thus also become important part of analysis within GAD approach. Next, we see within GAD approach that there is this focus on legal as well as customary rights. Includes state as one of the contributors to solutions to women's problems, and therefore there is this focus on giving women certain legal and customary rights which are more liberating and which bring women as equal partners to men in the society. It also recognizes that there are legal as well as customary rights, and the coexistence of the two sometimes disadvantages women. Within GAD approach, if we see, there are certain tools that GAD approach uses, and these are community organizing, public education, transformative forum building, coalition building, etc. A very important feature of GAD approach is that it politicizes practical needs and their transformation into strategic interests. It sees that women have practical needs as well as strategic interests, and it addresses the root inequalities of class as well as gender, which cause and restrict fulfillment of these needs and interests of women. Significantly, this if we want to understand what these strategic interests and practical gender needs are, the practical gender needs relate to immediate needs and physical conditions of women. They may include food, shelter, work, etc. Then there are also strategic interests. They are more important within GAD because they are long term and they relate to control, empowerment and status in society. These include social participation, political status, mobility, employment, inheritance, etc. Next, we will see how does GAD practitioners go about doing gender and development practice in the society. There is today, after the GAD approach, an increasing trend among national as well as international developmentalists to create and use gender analysis frameworks like the one we talked about earlier by Moser for evaluating gender differences in the allocation of power and productive resources, not only within households but also outside it. Therefore, today gender analysis frameworks are very common in NGOs, etc. GAD strategies are advocated and are being used, like as earlier mentioned, through the tools of community organizing, political activism, etc. These efforts, however, are scanty and they are still very rare in national and international contexts, and GAD has only been partially adopted into practice of development. The BITS bandage approach continues to be seen even after adoption of GAD approach. There is this difference between the policy and practice of GAD approach. Provision of community education, for example, is given to take care of women's education needs. However, the structural constraints that women face in their everyday lives in their way towards the school are not really actually practically taken care of even today. The efforts have also ignored the role of international systems in extending global inequities and increasing dependencies and the social construction of gender. Hardly any project actually questions the gender roles and responsibilities. While there has been increased recognition of the importance of gender or sexual division of labor in women's status, the increased participation of women in paid work is not assisted by men's increased participation in reproductive work within the household. Even the technologically assisted programs are not able to alter the social structural relations that marginalize women. Now that we have learnt about what is GAD approach, what are the major features, how it is being practiced today, we come to see what has been the major criticism against the theory, against the approach. Even though GAD has been seen as something which is relatively more comprehensive, it is the latest one, it comes as response to the limitations of earlier approaches, still there are a large number of criticisms that have been raised against GAD, and we are going to discuss it one by one. The major criticism that has been made against GAD is that it is a very good approach in theory, rather, but it does not work as much in practice, and there is this immense gap between the theory and practice of GAD approach. It has also been criticized for emphasizing the social differences between women and men, and it kind of neglects the bond that exists between them. There is this another section of criticism that says that in its treatment of social relations of gender, GAD does not do a very deep analysis, which results in inadequate explanation of how social relations affect and influence development programs aimed at women. It fails to examine the various trade-offs women have to make for marriage and motherhood, for example. It also fails to address differences among women. Gender mainstreaming in development is now being just co-opted and is usually used as a synonym for inclusion of women's issues. In practice, GAD has not been fully adopted. So we see that this particular approach treats development as a very complex process, which is influenced by various socio-political and economic processes and actors. So it does move beyond economic aspect of women's lives. It also moves beyond a focus on productive lives of women, and it addresses individual social and political needs as well. It does take a relatively more comprehensive approach and recognizes women's empowerment, male responsibility, and state's role in establishing equality of the sexes. Women, however, still continue to be seen as a homogeneous category as in the earlier approaches in practice, and therefore one can say that GAD still continues to have some limitations when it comes to implementing the tenets of this approach in practice. And these frameworks, despite the challenges, it can be said that have definitely made women and their issues to be recognized in the development world, in mainstream development agenda. As we see, if we try to see all the three approaches that have been discussed within this particular course, there has been shift from a focus on women only approach to a gender aware approach, where it is seen that we cannot work only with women, we have to work with both women and men, because it is not about women, it is rather about the gender relations which are unequal. Today, because of the efforts of all these approaches and the practitioners and activists who have worked within these approaches, there has been much advancement in the status of women today. Women are managing high-level offices today. There is relatively more equitable distribution of resources today in many societies and many countries and many cities. There are more platforms for partnerships between women and men, and even among women, that have been created due to the efforts within these approaches. Many of the national and local agencies have shown clear shifts in approach towards women development and their roles and rights in development, and state as well as big corporate and other agencies are having to acknowledge the significance of unequal gender relations in unequal benefits of development reaching the society. There is this recognition, there is this status where there is this acknowledgement of the problems that exist. This is not to deny that there still continue to be large number of women who are still living marginalized lives in areas and spaces where their rights are either unknown or not cared for. But these approaches have laid foundation for a more gender egalitarian society with better lives for women, and they still fall short of fully articulating and addressing women's lived experiences of their gender in development. To sum up, we see that GAD approach emerged from a critique of the WID approach in the 1980s, and it also came as a response to the shortcomings in the WAD approach. It is theoretically drawing from socialist feminist thought. The focus within this particular approach is that it looks at all aspects of women's lives: productive lives, reproductive lives, private lives, public lives, and thus it is able to offer a much more holistic understanding. It also questions and examines the basis of assigning sex roles, sex responsibilities, gender responsibilities to women and men. It questions why is it that women and men have been assigned these roles? How is it that these roles and responsibilities have been maintained over years? Then if we talk about the contribution that has been made by GAD approach, we see that it does not exclusively emphasize female solidarity. It very importantly and rightly so welcomes contributions of sensitive men, of men who understand they have a role to play in ensuring that women and men are equal. It also recognizes women's contributions inside as well as outside their homes, including non-commodity production. But despite being a more holistic understanding which GAD approach brings with itself, there has been a lot of criticism that has been made against it. For example, it rejects the public-private dichotomy, and it enters the private sphere and examines women's oppression within the family. Another thing which GAD does is that it rejects the public-private dichotomy. It enters the private sphere and examines women's oppression within the family. It sees family as a site of women's oppression. It very significantly emphasizes, as said earlier as well, state's duty in promoting women's emancipation. Women themselves are seen as agents of their own change, as the agents of change in their own lives within this approach, rather than being the passive recipients of development assistance. It recognizes differences of class, gender, race, etc. among women, and focuses on strengthening women's legal rights. It focuses on bringing women together with men. In a nutshell, it calls for altering existing social and power relations of gender, which assign roles, responsibilities, rights, and power to women and men in a manner which marginalizes women and privileges men. The students are advised to do more readings from the list of references that have been given to have a more deeper insight, a wider understanding of the concepts and issues that have been discussed in the module. Thank you.